Broken heart emotional hook, opening line. Sometimes the people you die for are the same ones who'd watch you drown, and then toast your fall with a glass of wine. But when Amahle Ndlovu's family told her to step away from us at the dinner table, they didn't know she would straight into her private jet. The chandelier sparkled above the long mahogany table as laughter and wine flowed freely. The Ndlovu mansion in Johannesburg was alive with chatter, the kind of noise that filled rooms but never hearts. At one end of the table sat Amahle Ndlovu, 29, her soft brown eyes glancing between the glittering cutlery and the people who once called her their pride. She smiled faintly, trying to join their conversations, but her voice was drowned by the clinking of glasses and whispers not meant for her ears. Her uncle, dressed in a silk suit, leaned toward her cousin and muttered, "Imagine. She tried to start a business with recycled materials. No wonder it failed." They laughed and the sound stabbed like a knife. Her sister, Nandi, rolled her eyes dramatically and whispered, "She still lives in that small apartment, can you believe it?" Their mother sighed heavily, shaking her head as if carrying Amahl's existence was a burden too heavy to bear. Amahle tried to hold herself together. She pushed food around her plate, her appetite fading with every cruel word disguised as laughter. Her father cleared his throat, his deep voice cutting through the noise. "So, Amahle," he said slowly, "what are you doing these days now that your venture didn't work out?" The table fell silent for a moment, all eyes turning to her, waiting, almost hungry for her to stumble. She forced a polite smile. "I'm working on something new," she said softly. "It's still in progress." But before she could continue, her uncle snorted. "Still in progress? That's what she said last time. Maybe it's time to admit business isn't for everyone, eh?" Then, she unveils her latest project, the Amahle Foundation for African Women Entrepreneurs, a fund dedicated to helping young women across the continent start their own businesses, offering mentorship, training, and funding for innovation. The audience rises to their feet, clapping and cheering as Amahle smiles humbly, tears glistening in her eyes. Across the continent, in the Ndlovu mansion, her family sits together watching the live broadcast. The same dining table where they once humiliated her now sits quiet. Her mother wipes her eyes. Her father looks down, guilt heavy in his expression. Even her sister whispers, "That's our Amahle." But her voice trembles with regret. Back on stage, Amahle ends her speech with grace. "They told me to step away," she says, smiling faintly. "So I did, and I stepped into my destiny." The hall explodes in applause as camera flashes sparkle like stars. Amahle raises her hand, not in pride but in gratitude. The girl they once dismissed had become a symbol of hope, resilience, and rebirth. A woman who didn't just rise, but lifted an entire generation with her. Her father continued, each word slicing her dignity apart. "Step away from us, Amahle. We don't need your failures near our name." The silence that followed was heavier than the sound of his anger. Even the chandelier lights seemed to dim. No one spoke. Not her mother. Not her sister. Not even the relatives who once praised her for being ambitious. They all just sat watching her break. Amahle pushed her chair back slowly, the scraping sound echoing across the marble floor. Her vision blurred, but her voice was calm, steady, almost frightening in its quiet strength. "You'll remember this moment one day," she said, her tone neither angry nor pleading, just final. Without another glance, she turned and walked out of the dining room. The massive chandelier above her shimmered as her shadow stretched long behind her. The heavy doors closed softly, but the echo of that night, of those cruel words, would follow her forever. For months, Amahle vanished from Johannesburg as if the earth had swallowed her whole. The grand Ndlovu mansion carried on with its glittering parties and loud laughter, but whenever her name came up, it was only followed by whispers and smirks. "She's probably gone bankrupt," her aunt would say. "Maybe she's begging on the streets now," her sister joked once, sipping champagne. Her father only grunted, pretending not to care. But deep down, even he wondered where she had gone. In truth, Amahle hadn't disappeared. She had simply chosen silence as her weapon. In a small rented room in Cape Town, far from her family's noise, she woke every day before dawn. Her apartment was tiny, the walls cracked, the furniture old, but it was hers, her space, her peace. She brewed coffee, opened her laptop, and poured every bit of her pain into purpose. She was working on something everyone once told her was impossible, a renewable energy project that could bring power to rural villages across South Africa. She had pitched the same idea to her family a year before, and they had laughed her out of the room. Solar energy? Her uncle had mocked. Leave that to foreigners, Amahle. We are business people, not dreamers. But this time she didn't need their approval. Amahle spent days studying online courses, teaching herself how to design microgrids, learning about funding proposals, and sending out hundreds of emails to investors, most of which went unanswered. Nights were harder. The silence was heavy, and there were times she cried quietly, remembering her father's words, "Step away from us." But those words, once meant to break her, had become fuel. Her savings ran low. Sometimes she skipped meals to pay for internet data or software. The electricity in her room flickered, but she kept typing through the darkness. She told herself that if she could survive rejection from her own blood, she could survive anything. Outside, Cape Town's winds howled through the streets, but inside that small apartment, something powerful was growing, a dream taking shape. Amahle wasn't broken. She was building. Slowly, painfully, and beautifully, one sleepless night at a time. The nights felt endless. Amahle sat under a flickering bulb, surrounded by wires, sketches, and unfinished solar models. Her fingers ached from typing, her eyes burned from sleeplessness, but she refused to stop. Every failure pushed her harder. When one prototype failed, she took it apart and started again. When the bank called about her overdue loan, she promised to pay soon, even though she barely had enough for food. The world outside was sleeping, but Amahle's dreams wouldn't let her rest. Sometimes she stared at her reflection in the dark window and whispered, "You can't quit now." Her voice was tired but steady. She had faced humiliation, hunger, and heartbreak, yet her fire only grew stronger. She believed that if she could create something that helped others, something real, then all the laughter and insults she had endured would finally mean something. Days turned into weeks, weeks into months. Her notebook filled with equations and sketches of solar panels that could store more energy than traditional ones. Still, nothing seemed to work. The system kept overheating, the batteries kept failing. More than once she sank to the floor, tears streaming down her face, whispering, "Maybe they were right about me." But each time she wiped her tears, stood up, and tried again. Then one quiet night, when the city outside was asleep, her phone buzzed. She almost ignored it, thinking it was another debt reminder, but when she saw the sender's name, her heart froze. It was from Solar One International, a global renewable energy investor. The email began with, "We came across your design for a rural solar microgrid. It's brilliant. We'd like to discuss a partnership." For a moment, Amahle couldn't move. She read the message again and again, her hands trembling. Her breath caught in her chest, and then she broke. Not in pain but in pure relief. She sank to her knees, laughing and crying all at once. This time her tears weren't from struggle, they were from victory. All those silent nights, all the doubts, all the failures, they had led her here. The girl who walked away from the dinner table with nothing had just been offered a deal worth millions. Amahle's time had finally come. 2 years passed, and the woman everyone once mocked had become a name no one could ignore. Amahle Ndlovu, the quiet, underestimated daughter, was now the founder and CEO of Ndlela Energy Solutions, a clean tech company changing lives across Africa. What began in her tiny rented room in Cape Town had grown into a global movement. Her solar microgrids powered schools, hospitals, and entire villages that once lived in darkness. Her company didn't just make money, it made a difference. Amahle's mornings now began in a glass-walled office overlooking the city skyline. Journalists lined up for interviews. Her team of engineers, once doubters, now called her Madam Vision. The same idea her family had dismissed as foolish was now praised by experts as revolutionary. Every newspaper headline carried her name, Amahle Ndlovu, the woman lighting Africa. One morning, as she sipped her tea, her assistant rushed in holding a golden envelope. Inside was a letter that made her heart skip. She had been featured on Forbes Africa's Under 30 Innovators list. For a moment, she sat in silence, letting the reality sink in. 2 years ago, she was begging banks for loans. Today, she was inspiring an entire generation. Her phone wouldn't stop ringing. Governments wanted to partner with her. Investors wanted to expand her company overseas. Every door that once slammed in her face now opened wide. But Amahle stayed calm. She hadn't forgotten the voices that once told her, "You don't belong here." Meanwhile, back in Johannesburg, the Ndlovu family began to hear her name everywhere. At church, in magazines, on television, even at business conferences where her innovations were being discussed. Her mother's friends whispered, "Isn't that your daughter? The one who failed?" Her father stayed silent, pretending not to care. But deep down, something twisted in his chest, pride mixed with regret. At night, Amahle would look out at the glowing city lights and smile softly. She had finally become the woman she was always meant to be. Powerful, independent, unstoppable. The laughter that once broke her had turned into the fuel that built her empire. And now the world, including her family, was forced to say her name with respect, even if it tasted like envy on their tongues. It was a quiet Sunday evening when Amahle's phone buzzed with a message from her assistant. Inside the envelope that arrived at her office was a gold-trimmed invitation, elegant, embossed with her family's crest. It read, "You are warmly invited to the Ndlovu family reunion dinner." For a long moment she stared at it in silence. The words glimmered under the light, but they carried ghosts from her past. That same dining room, she could still hear her father's voice echoing. "Step away, Amahle. You don't belong here." Those words had once shattered her, but tonight they only made her smile. Her assistant, curious, leaned in. "Are you going to attend, ma'am?" There was a pause. Then Amahle looked up from her desk, her eyes calm but powerful. "Yes," she said softly, "but this time I'll bring my own ride." And what a ride it was! On the night of the dinner, the quiet estate that once belonged to her father lit up with camera flashes and whispers. A sleek black electric car, her company's newest model, pulled into the driveway. The engine didn't roar. It hummed smooth and confident, just like its creator. When the doors opened, Amahle stepped out in a long emerald dress that shimmered under the lights. Every head turned. Every whisper stopped. The same relatives who once laughed behind her back now gasped. Cousins who once avoided her suddenly smiled too wide. Her mother's hands trembled as she held the serving tray. Her father stood at the end of the table, frozen, his pride and guilt clashing behind his eyes. The atmosphere was thick with disbelief. No one had expected her to come, and certainly not like this. Amahle walked in gracefully, her heels clicking softly against the marble floor. She looked around the room, the same walls that had once witnessed her humiliation. But now everything had changed. The power in the air was hers. As dinner began, no one dared to mention the past. Yet everyone felt it. The unspoken truth that the girl they once pushed away had returned not as a guest, but as the one everyone wished to impress. And with that quiet smile still on her lips, Amahle knew. This time she was the one setting the table. The grand dining hall glowed under the warm golden light of the chandeliers, just as it did the night Amahle was cast out. Crystal glasses clinked, laughter filled the air. And the same people who once mocked her were gathered around the same long mahogany table, unaware of the storm that was about to walk through their door. The camera would have panned slowly across their smiling faces, catching the shimmer of pride, the pretense of unity, until the heavy double doors opened. Amahle stepped in. The room fell silent. She wore a sleek white dress that flowed like calm water, every step deliberate and graceful. Her hair glistened under the light, her face serene, untouched by the bitterness of the past. In that moment, she didn't look like the girl they had dismissed. She looked like the woman who had built her own world from the ashes they left behind. Her father froze mid-sentence, the color draining from his face. The man who once told her she was a disgrace now stared at her as if seeing her for the first time. Her mother's hand trembled as she reached for her glass, trying to hide her shock. And her sister, the one who had laughed the loudest that night, leaned toward their cousin and whispered, "Is that really her?" Amahle's lips curved into a gentle smile. "Good evening, everyone," she said, her voice soft but commanding. No arrogance. No anger. Just quiet, undeniable power. She greeted each family member with grace, shaking hands, offering kind words, as if she had already forgiven them long before walking in. She sat at the same seat she once left in tears. Only now, the air around her felt different. It was heavy with respect. People who once pitied her now couldn't meet her eyes. The silence spoke louder than any insult ever could. The dinner continued, but every conversation circled back to her. Her success, her company, her courage. And while they tried to act as if nothing had happened, everyone in that room knew the truth. The same table that once broke her was now her stage. Amahle had returned, not seeking approval, but showing them what true strength looks like when it wears forgiveness instead of pride. The clinking of cutlery slowed as the dinner went on, tension hanging quietly under the fake laughter. Her father began his usual boasting, speaking about the family's legacy, their influence, and the so-called pride of the Ndlovu name. Her sister chimed in, bragging about her designer brand deals. It was the same empty noise Amahle had heard before, the noise that once made her shrink inside. But not tonight. Amahle sat there, calm and silent, her eyes steady, her smile soft, when her uncle leaned across the table and said, "So, Amahle, what have you been up to since that little business of yours?" The question dripped with sarcasm, drawing small chuckles from the others. She didn't respond immediately. Instead, she reached into her purse and placed her phone on the table. The bright screen lit up with a single image, a news alert glowing in bold letters. Amahle Ndlovu, founder of Ndlila Energy Solutions, announces $120 million global green tech partnership. The words hung in the air like thunder after lightning. Forks froze midair. Glasses stopped halfway to mouths. Every whisper, every smirk, every breath gone. The once loud room fell into a silence so deep it could cut. Her uncle's jaw tightened, his lips parting without words. We didn't know," he finally stammered, his voice small now, stripped of arrogance. Her father looked down, the weight of regret visible in his eyes. Even her mother couldn't hide the mix of pride and guilt that trembled on her face. Amahle finally spoke, her tone calm but firm, every word measured and clear. "You told me to step away from you," she said, her eyes moving from one stunned face to another. "So I did. And I found myself." No one dared to speak after that. The chandelier above flickered slightly, its golden light reflecting off her phone screen, the symbol of the woman they once cast aside. Amahle leaned back in her chair, peaceful, not seeking applause, just closure. That night, for the first time, the Ndlovu saw what real power looked like. Not in money or status, but in quiet strength. The same girl they mocked had come back not to prove them wrong, but to remind them that sometimes the best revenge is success spoken softly. The night air outside the mansion was still, the kind of silence that follows shock. Amahle stepped out from the golden doors with her head held high, her white dress flowing like a banner of quiet victory. Behind her, the laughter that once mocked her had turned into whispers of disbelief. Her heels clicked softly against the marble steps, each step a reminder that she no longer belonged to the world she once begged to accept her. Her father stood frozen by the doorway, calling out, "Amahle, wait!" But she didn't turn back. She didn't need to. The time for explanations was long gone. As she reached the driveway, her assistant was already waiting beside a sleek black car. The Ndlovu estate shimmered behind her, grand and hollow, just like their pride. Then a deep, powerful rumble filled the sky. Everyone looked up. A black and gold private jet descended slowly from the clouds, its lights slicing through the night. The NDLV insignia, her company's initials, gleamed boldly on the tail. Gasps echoed through the courtyard. Even the servants came out to see, their eyes wide with awe. Amahle walked toward the airstrip just beyond the mansion's gates, her stride calm, unhurried. The wind from the jet's engines caught her hair, lifting it like a crown. Her family stood at the top of the stairs, watching as the truth hit them harder than any words could. The woman they cast out had built something greater than they could ever imagine. Her assistant opened the jet door with quiet respect. Amahle turned around one last time, her eyes meeting theirs. Not with anger, but with finality. Then with a faint smile she said, "Next time you tell someone to walk away, make sure they can't fly." The words hung in the air, sharp and unforgettable. The jet engines roared louder, shaking the ground beneath their feet as she ascended the steps. The door closed behind her with a soft hiss. Moments later, the jet lifted off, its golden lights reflecting on the stunned faces below. The sky swallowed it whole, leaving behind nothing but silence and the echo of her power. That night, Amahle didn't just rise into the air. She rose above everything that once tried to break her. Months later, the camera opens to a grand auditorium filled with world leaders, investors, and young dreamers. The banners read Global Women in Innovation Summit Nairobi. The crowd erupts in applause as Amahle Ndlovu steps onto the stage, dressed in an elegant African print suit. Her poise commands the room, her presence brighter than the hundreds of lights flashing around her. She pauses at the podium, scanning the sea of faces before her, faces of women who once felt unseen, unheard, underestimated, just like she once did. Then she begins, her voice steady but warm. "I learned that family doesn't always mean support," she says, her words echoing through the hall. "Sometimes walking away isn't losing them, it's finding yourself." The crowd falls silent, hanging on every syllable. She shares her story, not with bitterness but with strength. She talks about being laughed at, called a failure, told she didn't belong. She talks about building Ndlila Energy Solutions from a tiny apartment with nothing but hope, determination, and sleepless nights. "I didn't build this to prove them wrong," she continues softly. "I built it to prove that no one can define your worth but you." Then, she unveils her latest project, the Amahle Foundation for African Women Entrepreneurs, a fund dedicated to helping young women across the continent start their own businesses, offering mentorship, training, and funding for innovation. The audience rises to their feet, clapping and cheering as Amahle smiles humbly, tears glistening in her eyes. Across the continent, in the Ndlovu mansion, her family sits together watching the live broadcast. The same dining table where they once humiliated her now sits quiet. Her mother wipes her eyes. Her father looks down, guilt heavy in his expression. Even her sister whispers, "That's our Amahle." But her voice trembles with regret. Back on stage, Amahle ends her speech with grace. "They told me to step away," she says, smiling faintly. "So I did, and I stepped into my destiny." The hall explodes in applause as camera flashes sparkle like stars. Amahle raises her hand, not in pride but in gratitude. The girl they once dismissed had become a symbol of hope, resilience, and rebirth. A woman who didn't just rise, but lifted an entire generation with her.